So welcome everybody, welcome to this session today on the manufacturing challenges in the new therapies, cellular and gene therapy of course. And we're going to look at in detail what are the challenges facing this very particular part of therapeutics. And we have with us today on stage Serge Braun, who is Scientific Director at AFM Téléthon. Welcome, Serge.
Thank you.
And we also have Antoine Jourdan, who is the Health Project Director at Direction Générale des Entreprises. Bonjour, Antoine.
Bonjour.
And we have, remotely, Frédéric Collet, President at LEM, les Entreprises du Médicament. Hello, Frédéric. We heard a bonjour. We saw a bonjour. We saw the lips move.
And then, can you hear me?
Yes, good.
All
good.
right.
So you're here. Okay, fine. And we also have the pleasure of welcoming Richard Schneider, who is Vice President of Science and Technology Pharma Services, Viral Vector Services at Thermo Fisher. Hi, Richard.
Good morning.
Good morning, or good afternoon. Good afternoon for us. Where are you?
I am in the Boston area.
So it's
today.
morning, yeah, okay.
Yes.
I'm going to turn to you, Serge, and ask you a kind of background question to put us in perspective, give us some context. Where do we stand in terms of manufacturing in the cell and gene therapy field?
Yeah, so maybe a few words about the history of gene therapy, because the manufacturing issue was not really anticipated at this time. So gene therapy is a fairly new technology. The first clinical trial was held in the US in 1990 in immunodeficiency disorder. But the first proof of concept came from Europe, from a program led by the Italian Téléthon and collaboration with our lab, Geneton. So I'm representing a patient organization, but I'll come back to that afterwards. And it was also, so this proof of concept was demonstrated in also another immunodeficiency disorder, so in a genetic disorder, very rare disorder. And the first wave of clinical trials basically used an ex vivo approach by retrieving cells from the patients, namely here bone marrow stem cells, genetically modify those cells using a vector, usually a virus, that transduce the cells with the therapeutic gene, and then cells are injected back to the patients. And it was pretty successful, because now with 20 years of follow-up, those patients virtually have a normal life with no treatment at all, and physician says they are cured. And it gave rise to the first gene therapy, one of the first gene therapy product, Streamvelis, licensed by GSK. And other products then reached the market pretty recently. The first gene therapy product was approved in 2015, and we are in 2020. And there are now 10 products that are on the market. Some of them use this same technology. Some of them are tackling cancer, lymphoma, for example. And they use the same technology that was initiated in this very rare disorder. The second wave of products used direct injections of vectors in organs, and first of all in the eye, which represent a very attractive organ for gene therapy. And the first product was marketed in the US in Leber amaurosis, a rare retinal disorder. And there is a new one which is knocking at the door in France and Europe with a French company named GeneSight for optic neuropathy, also local administration. And the last wave is coming, and by using intravenous administration of vectors, huge amount of vectors, and we will tackle the production issue. So huge amount of vectors injected IV to treat another rare disorder, spinal muscular atrophy. The goal is to get to the peripheral nervous systems, to motor neurons, and it completely changed the history of this disease, which is a fatal disorder. In 50% of the cases, children do not live more than a year or 18 months, and some of them are now very well, walking, dancing is just incredible, provided you treat them very early on. But interestingly enough, and I wanted to stress that out of those 10 products, 4 owe to patient organizations, because they believed in gene therapy from the very beginning, and especially AFM Teleton. 4 of those products we funded from research to clinical trial and to clinical development. But financial means were missing. For the late stage clinical development, we all know how expensive it can be to develop drugs, and especially new entities. And unfortunately, nor France nor many European countries can afford to invest hundreds of millions into clinical development of those products. And so most of those products were developed by US companies or are now big pharma. But it's interesting to see big pharma coming in this field. So one word on production, just to set the goal. We heard in a previous session about vaccines. Conventional vaccines use viral particles, and usually a dose is worth 1 million viral particles injected under the skin or intramuscularly. When it comes to gene therapy, and especially for products that are injected in the bloodstream, what is injected is 1 billion more in terms of viral particles. So 10 to the 15. Wow. It's huge. And so we all know that we heard about potential shortage in production of vaccines worldwide. So we can easily understand that with the needs that are in terms of viral loads that are necessary for gene therapy, the production issue is just tremendous. It's a huge challenge, but we can go into more details afterwards.
Right. So what we're facing here, and maybe I can turn to you, Frédéric. What we're facing here is it's relatively recent, extraordinarily successful, but very complicated to manufacture. What's your perspective, Frédéric? We can't hear you. We still can't hear you.
Is that any better?
Yes.
All right. Splendid. Sorry. No, what Serge has just described is really fascinating, because we see that a very, very fast and accelerating trend and pace for these new products. And actually, as he says, we are seeing a very fast development in many different therapeutic areas, in cancer, in ophthalmology, in blood diseases, in rare diseases also. So it's absolutely fascinating. And actually, we see that also in France, there is an ecosystem that is, when it comes to gene therapy, that is quite effective. And if I'm not mistaken, France is the second country in Europe when it comes to gene therapies, not just development, but also research and manufacturing. And actually, what I find very interesting is when I look back, is to see how much manufacturing has become a strategic item when it comes to gene therapies. It used to, when I look at biotherapies, when I look at pharmaceutical therapies, it looks like we are seeing an increasing role of and strategic importance of manufacturing in this kind of new development and new therapies. So yes, if coming back to your question, if on the one side we see a very fast, accelerating, and promising development for the patient, but we also see that the crisis has actually somewhat demonstrated that there are also some weaknesses we need to take care of. And the weaknesses when it comes to, I would say, two different aspects. One aspect is if we want to be an attractive environment, we have to consider our environment as a whole. Means we can't break it into pieces. And we really have to take care of the fact that it's a whole environment, starting with research attractiveness, continuing with clinical trial attractiveness, continuing after with manufacturing, and then ending up with access to patients. And there is no way, actually, we can consider developing and strengthening further the attractiveness of either Europe or France without considering the whole picture of all of that. And the second question we are up against, and we see raising step by step very clearly, is that the framework we have to secure the access to patients of this new innovative treatment is not adapted anymore to this kind of new treatments. And we have to review the way we actually approach not just the financing, but the overall approach of these new treatments. And just as an aside, this is something we have, the LEM in the beginning of the crisis called for an external report helping us to have a broader view of the environment and the strategic questions that are at stake at the moment. And clearly one of those is about the financing and the access of these new treatments to the patient, considering the very particular pattern that very often we have to address first a certain level of prevalence before we continue to treat the incidence. So there is a very specific pattern that has got to be addressed. So back to your question, yes, definitely some clear strengths and fast development with exceptional promises being made to the patient. On the other side, a framework that is not yet completely secured in order to secure on the one side the coherence and on the other side the access to the patient.
Yes, thank you very much, Frederick. Now I can turn to you, Richard. And obviously we have a situation here that we could almost describe as a paradigm shift in manufacturing. But what's your perspective?
In the 2000s, I think, to add to Serge's comments, there was the thing that really moved the field forward was an understanding of aligning the vectors with their disease targets and their organ targets. I think up until that point, things were rather arbitrary, and once there was an alignment, let's say with lentiviral vectors for ex vivo therapies and AAV for in vivo therapies, that's where the clinical success happened, which brought in a lot of investment and new company creation, and has really established a extremely robust marketplace and demand for manufacturing, and so the challenges around manufacturing are, first of all, the products themselves are very complex. I mean, we're talking about megadalton viruses and whole cells for cell therapy. That requires a heavy investment into infrastructure. In the case of cell therapies, that's more of a scale out type of process because these are individualized therapies. They require large investments into the factories that make those products. For viral vectors, it's a scale up paradigm and developing the technologies and the robust processes to support large-scale manufacturing as defined by Serge earlier for specific diseases, but also as we get into more common diseases, heart diseases, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and other ocular diseases that are much more widespread, that demand is just going to keep increasing. So you overlay the demand, the complexity of the molecules, but then the diversity of these drug products. And so, even though we define them as viral vector based, there are many different variants of these delivery systems, and each one needs a manufacturing platform to support it. So, the last piece I'll add to this is around expertise. You can build these factories, you can build very large factories, but at the end of the day, with a new field, the expertise to manufacture and do the proper quality control analyses of these products is what is another rate limiting aspect to the growth of the field. So more on this later.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. And now perhaps we can turn to you again, Frédéric, because we can see that this is an area of manufacturing and an area of research that is extraordinarily attractive. But why do you think that is? I mean, where is all there are a lot of possibilities that are in the pipeline, but let's talk about the potential of these therapies.
What do you mean in terms of attractiveness? In terms of what?
Well, in terms of the different clinical and preclinical programs that are already on board.
Well, actually, I think the potential in terms of these gene therapies is absolutely is massive, and we see that when we look at the pipeline going forward. We see the potential, and actually, it comes back to what I was saying. Actually, it's a chain that has to be strengthened in order to secure the attractiveness of these developments. And again, it starts with research and the way, in particular, we can leverage the collaboration between public and private research. The second thing is in clinical trial, and how we secure the field, the attractiveness of the clinical trial environment for these very new therapies, and in particular with the partnerships we have with the centers. Then the manufacturing, as I said, is also closely interconnected with this clinical environment. And as well, in some regard, also with the access when it comes to the later stage of the development, means in the access to the patient. So I think, again, I come back to the comment I was making. This is the whole chain that has to be considered when it comes to this new development and when it comes to the way they will be made accessible to the patient in the coming years. And what we have to acknowledge is that this is going to be a major change. It will be a major disruption for the healthcare system in the coming years, so that these treatments can be made acceptable and accessible to all the patients in need in the coming years. And this is not something we see; it is something of a magnitude we've never seen before.
Yeah, major disruption, Serge.
Yes, if we just talk numbers, 30 products are at the phase 3 clinical stage. Gene therapy products, and in various indications, including cancer. Actually, 60% of the products that are currently under development are cancer products. Then we have cardiovascular disorders, rare diseases and neurological disorders, and also infectious disorders. For example, I went to the WHO website looking for all the products that are currently are either at the clinical stage or preclinical stage for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, so the coronavirus. 35 products in clinical trials, 16 of them are gene therapy products. If we look at the 145 programs at the preclinical stage, 60 of them are gene therapy products. Adenoviruses, the measles virus for Pasteur, naked DNA, RNA, those are gene therapy product based. And so the potential for gene therapy is just huge. The business model is slightly different. It's another issue we will probably address later on.
So Richard, really a lot of opportunities for new innovation.
Absolutely. You have to frame this in what the regulatory paradigm is, right? And so one of the challenges I think has been the evolving regulatory paradigm around these types of products, and as that framework becomes more clear, then the innovation can respond to that. And so one of the very positive aspects of the evolving regulatory paradigm, at least in the United States, has been the FDA's encouragement of companies being able to access accelerated pathways to bring their products to market, where data at early phase trials, if it's supported by a robust CMC, can be considered for licensure in a window of around 4 years instead of the classic 10 to 12 years. So within that context, innovation and being able to establish more control on the processes in the form of hardware and analytics, in-process analytics, as well as more robust analytics to characterize the final product. These are the evolving technologies that are going to drive us to that more accelerated paradigm and really support our clients. And so things around standardizing raw materials, standardizing the processes themselves, implementing inline, at-line, and online analytics, and then for in-process control, and then more robust analytics that are have the specificity and detection limits and quantification limits that really allow us to characterize the products and release them fast. So high throughput analytics are going to be very much part of this paradigm.
So we have a situation where they have this this enormous potential, and as Serge was pointing out, an incredible already a situation where a lot of people are more and more involved in gene and cellular therapy. And we have this shortage of supply. So what are the reasons behind this gap? Is it because it's so recent? What for you is the real reason?
Well, I think, as I said before, there's physical capacity constraints, the number of clean rooms. For cell therapy, again, it's a scale out, so you need several small types of suites to handle autologous cell therapies. But then for viral vector manufacturing, those processes are more like traditional biologics manufacturing in bioreactors and chromatography skids and the like. um, uh, having the technologies to control those processes and really understand those processes and keep them in a narrow tolerance so that there's repeatability to ensure that these special starting materials and raw materials are in ample supply, which they're not. And then I think the third leg of the stool is around expertise and being able to manufacture these very large, complex molecules, how you physically handle them, how they're stored, whether they can be frozen or not, whether they can be filtered in certain ways. There's many nuances to the manufacturing itself that requires expertise in the development of a workforce that understands those nuances.
Serge.
Yes, I'm just referring to a statement that GSK released last year about the manufacturing issue. It was called the capacity crunch. There was a recent document from Global Data about manufacturing, estimating that the amount of 2,000-liter fermenters that are necessary to meet the current needs is something like 1,500. So we would need 1,500 200-liter fermenters to meet the current needs. And this is just not feasible. So this means that we need new technologies, disruptive technologies, to, for example, to make sure that the producing cells, the producer cells, because in most of the cases, the technology is using cells that are genetically engineered to generate those viral particles. And so we need disruptive technologies to change the game in order to force those cells or maybe new cell types or new biological systems to generate tons of viral particles, well characterized and fully competent viral particles. And we are at the edge of basic science, cell biology, virology, and devices and engineering technologies. We are in between basic science and industry, and so there is a need for close collaboration between the different experts. I'm pretty confident that one day we will succeed, but the objective is to be able to gain a factor of 100 or even 1,000 to make in terms of production yields in order to meet the needs. Otherwise, the whole field will just shrink because nobody is able to produce enough of it.
So a need for innovation, a need for disruptive technology, but also a need for collaboration. And this is where I can turn to Antoine. Thank you, Antoine, for being so patient.
Of course.
What new ways of collaboration are there across the board between the private and the public sectors that you would like to talk about?
So just as a reminder for those of you who are not as familiar with the economic ministry where I work, so our job is essentially to make sure that France is an attractive place for healthcare industries to develop and make sure that we lift all hurdles and all the red tape that you can face to make sure that to help you essentially come in France, research in France, invest in France, manufacture in France. And I want to comment very quickly on what you were mentioning a little bit earlier about the fact that we needed to increase 10-fold or even 100-fold our productivity in terms of manufacturing of new biotherapies. That's essentially a target we have for 2028 in France. Like there's an entire strategy around how to achieve that target of increasing, multiplying by 10 or even 100 our productivity in manufacturing these products. And the collaboration between the private sector and the public sector here in these new therapies is absolutely crucial because, well, we can help, like the public can help the private sector to make the country a more attractive place. There is money that can help fund your research, that can fund your industrialization processes. We can help as well to make sure that we can give you visibility. You must remember what the president was saying yesterday when he said that he wanted to make sure that France is the next Boston. And Thermo Fisher, you're very welcome to come to the new Boston in a few years. We want to make the country, this country, the most innovative place, the most attractive place for innovation in biotherapies in the world. Now, so then again, there was this crisis with COVID-19, which really underlined a number of issues we've had with manufacturing in the country. So we already knew that there was probably not enough factories. We were talking about the capacity of, I forgot the technical word you used, of the cylinders to produce biotherapies. And so in France, there's about 9 to 10 CDMOs right now. There's about 9 factories that work for large pharma, which is clearly not enough for the needs. So we want to make sure that we will help you increase production on our soil for that. We've also realized that even though there are 10 new marketed biotherapies in the market right now, only one of them is currently being produced in France, which is weird when you think that 8 out of those 10 were actually partly researched in France. So there's clearly a challenge here, a manufacturing challenge, to make sure that all this research that's being done by the public sector, this research that's done by the private sector, can actually translate into manufacturing on our territory. So this is where COVID-19 comes in. It was dramatic. It still is dramatic. I mean, a human catastrophe, social catastrophe, economic catastrophe. I truly believe, and so this is a personal note, I truly believe that we've learned from it. And there's a very strong political will right now. So you've heard Macron yesterday, you've heard Agnès Pannier-Runacher yesterday, to make sure that France in next January will no longer be the same France as it was in January of this year. It will be very attractive for healthcare industries. And so you have this whole plan de relance that's currently going on, and we're talking about billions. I mean, I actually have the numbers. So we're at 35 billion euros economic stimulus package. 800 million euros of this can actually be used in 2020, so in the next 2 months. And there's large amounts of money that are here to help healthcare industries industrialize. So to build factories, bioproduction factories in France, to do research and developments in France on these issues, to make sure that in 2028 we actually we multiply by 10 or even 100 productivity rates in new therapies. And so there's always a place to be and a time to be to do new things. And if I can give you 2 takeaways from my long intervention. Number 1, so the government is here to help you to do business. We are on your side, and make sure to come to us if you need help so that we can make sure that things go as smoothly as possible for you. And second takeaway, there's always a place to be and a time to be to do things, especially innovative things. And I truly believe that the place to be and the place to be and the time to be to do innovation in healthcare right now is France right now.
So thank you very much. So I think we should sing La Marseillaise now, but there's not that many in the audience, so maybe we couldn't do that straight away. But yeah, so pretty inspiring stuff. I think that things seem to be changing, but it seems to be also huge challenges ahead in terms of manufacturing. So where should we start? That's what I'd like to ask the panel. Where what does this sector need? What's the first thing we should start on? Richard.
Well, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we just heard with the incredible investment that's going to be made in France around facilities and innovation and those things. I mean, I would hope that there is a significant portion being devoted to education and training so that you can actually grow a workforce with that expertise that's concomitant with the growth of the physical facilities.
Because for you, expertise is the biggest gap at the moment.
It absolutely is. I mean, I think as the technology is evolving so quickly, there's a certain pace, but there's also a baseline number of people physically that we need to support this industry and also keep up with the innovation.
Frédéric.
Yes, no, actually, I completely concur with what Richard has just said. It's interesting because I can give you an example. It takes about 6 months at the moment. We are increasing. I'm thinking about a factory we have in France, and we have to increase the capacity. And when it comes to capacity increases, it starts with building the competence, and it takes 6 months actually to train a technician before it becomes certified and can actually work. And 6 months is a minimum time gap we need to have in order to train, develop these people, and make them again competent on this very, very specific kind of development. So I completely agree. It all starts with building the competence, and therefore in two different ways: by creating the academic ecosystem around this environment, and also by breaking all the silos between public and private sectors. And actually, I know that in some countries it is more fluid and the connections are stronger. In France, we are kind of sitting one next to another. And actually, the new bill that was presented by the Minister of Research and Education has actually provided more means in order to facilitate the transfer, to build bridges, to contribute to build a common culture between these two environments, public and private, and this is absolutely key. In particular, like in a country like France, where we have so big, actually, I think among the top 15 academic research environment, in the world, four of them are French. So definitely we need to further strengthen the collaboration between these two environments, the public and the private one.
And Frederick, I mean, were you inspired by what happened and what's been happening over these past 2 days? We had Emmanuel Macron talking to us yesterday, Agnès Pannier-Runacher as well, and Antoine really declaring a political will, a strong political will to foster collaboration between the public and private sector. Do you think things are moving?
Yes, definitely things are moving. And actually, I've seen things moving very fast over the last few years. And definitely, Emmanuel Macron is coming in with a very strong vision and will also to make France an attractive place. And actually, to that regard, biotech and gene therapies are highly attractive because they create a much wider environment of attractivity. And please remember that we are healthcare players, but we are also economic players, and we have a lot to bring when it comes to country attractiveness. And actually, I come back to the point I was making earlier. There are two things we need when it comes to investment in a country. And I know that in biotechs or in gene therapies also, most of the developments are coming from rather small entities and not yet by big farmers. And when it comes to investment, there are two major things that have to be secured. The first one is the coherence of the chain. I think I've been talking about that at length. About the fact it's a complete chain that has got to be secured from research down to access. And the second piece is the visibility of the measures and the coherence of the decisions that are being made in the long and short run. And here we are just at the moment as we speak in the middle of what we call the PLFSS, that is a new health bill, and we really work together with all the stakeholders to make sure that the decisions that are being taken short term are also coherent with the attractiveness we are willing to build in the long run. And, for instance, one of the key elements the key elements of this new health bill are about, on one side, the ATU, that is the early access mechanism that is being simplified, and this is a great actually for the new therapies. And on the other side, also the weight of the regulation that is particularly massive in France, and according to the announcement, are to be simplified and also changed and adapted.
Serge.
Yes, I remember 7 or 8 years ago, we went to the G5, the major French pharma, and also to various people of the government, the French government, trying to convince them by saying what was going to happen in gene therapy, and now it's happening. At this time, nobody really was convinced, unfortunately. France was a pioneer in the gene therapy field. As I told you, some of those products that are now on the market originated from France. And we were not very good in industrializing those discoveries. But I see the two things. First, good news, and I really see it as a good news that the government now has decided to invest in new technologies and in production, not only facilities but also technologies. And especially now with this COVID crisis, I think that everybody is convinced we need some autonomy in terms of production. And the same holds true for gene therapy. And so I think it's also an opportunity. That's the second point, because we need innovation. And yes, there is a fantastic research network in France, and we need to make sure that the different stakeholders talk to each other, the scientists, the industry, and people like us who are in between those two worlds. And there is a plan that is currently proposed by the Contrat Stratégique de Filière, so by the French industry and academic world, with this ambition of improving productivity by the factor of 100 and helping France and make sure France is regain a leading position in manufacturing, because this is key, and this is especially key for gene therapy.
And when we talk about fostering collaboration, Frédéric talked about breaking down the silos. What do you think the main resistance is to that?
In France, there is a special culture. Basic scientists. The new generation is different, I have to say, but usually the French scientists do not trust industry, and industry doesn't trust really scientists, and they are two completely cultural worlds. But we are all learning, and we as a patient organization also learned a lot. We invested 700 million euros in gene therapy over the years. Huge amounts invested, and we faced a lot of criticism because some people felt that it was a dead end. Gene therapy is a dead end. It's never going to work, and now we see it's working. But if we want to make sure it's not a dead end, we have to make sure that production process are made available.
So, Antoine, perhaps a few words on that. I mean, given this round table, given all the complications and the complexity, and I can see you're very enthusiastic about providing help and providing support. What do you see as the main resistance? What do you see the main sticking point at the moment for collaboration between public and private?
So for me, the main issue we've had, and that was really underlined during the COVID crisis back in March and April, was the fact that you had all these different parts of both the administration and the private sector that would work in silos. And this is feeding into your point that I feel that healthcare industry should be thought as a whole. Like when you have to think of what happens between the bench, the moment you have an idea, you're starting to work on that idea, all the way to the patient's bedside. And so 2 years or 3 years ago, you still had the thing where you would have the academia that would be thinking about research, and you'd have people taking care of training, and you'd have people taking care of financing, market access, etc. And you'd have all these silos and walls, which would make the process really tough, especially when you're talking about paradigm shifts, when you're talking about breakthrough innovation. This is where it gets difficult. And for me, the COVID crisis has shown how we could break down those silos. In France, so I'm not going to glorify, once again, everything we've done, but well, we've been able to react fairly quickly facing COVID, and we've learned from that. And we're trying to implement right now everything we've learned to break down all those silos to make processes very easy, and so that someone who would come to France would be able to find everything going from the research and development, the people you need to recruit, the quick access to market, the financing. Like a startup should be able to get 50 million or 80 million euros ticket financing. That should be possible in France.
So France is a one-stop shop.
Well, kind of, yes.
Okay. We could turn to the audience here and ask if there are any questions or any comments that you'd like to make. Yes? Is there a microphone?
I'm Charlie Mortazavi. I work in regulatory affairs in Sanofi, and I'm in charge of gene and cell therapy. But to comment on what was said, and which was very interesting, is that this field of new therapies, gene and cell therapy, is more than new. It's new for the regulators, and it's new for the industry, for the sponsors. And if I recall, the first treatment is less than 8 years, and as of today, there's less than 20 products on the market. But the way we regulate, I think 15 products, less than depending on the definition of gene and cell therapy. And the way we regulate those products is the way we used to regulate mAbs and vaccines. And the quality and what we call the CMC standards, the way we produce and the requirements that are needed to produce are completely different from what we're currently doing for vaccines or for mAbs. And there's this shift in the way we see and the requirements that we're going to apply for gene and cell therapy. And if the last 10 years was the era for mAbs and vaccines and biologicals, starting in 2020, that's the era for gene and cell therapy. And there will be a shift in the requirements for those regulatory requirements from the FDA and the EMA.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And actually, two short examples to further highlight that. You virtually have to follow the patients for their entire life, because you are injected something that may remain for the entire life in the body of those patients. So you have to follow them their entire life. The second point, this is back to right after the Second World War. The gene therapy, even though gene therapy was just a concept at this time, but it reminds me that you have the right to treat the patients, but not his children or on the descendants.
Yeah, successes.
The successes, because. So this means you have to prove that the gene therapy product is unable to reach the sexual cells, and in order to make sure that it won't be seen in the potential children that the patient may have, and that's something that is peculiar to gene therapy, of course.
Any other comments or questions from the room? Then I think we should move to conclusion time for the panel. Richard, a few words of conclusion, and I'm sure that word expertise is going to come back in here.
Well, I was just going to say that it's impressive the amount of commitment the government is making towards the sector. I would just recommend that in addition to primary manufacturing operations, that attention is paid to the raw material suppliers as well, because that will become the next bottleneck once you solve for the primary manufacturing. And you know, we at Thermo Fisher are working very hard to develop standardized processes that should help streamline manufacturing, the raw material stream, and allow clients and patients access to drugs. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Frederic, a few words of conclusion.
Yes, no, just a few words. I agree that these treatments are requiring that we review completely the toolbox we have. And Serge has just talked about the regulatory aspects of it. But this is true also for the patient pathway. This is true also for the drug pathway. This is true also for the way the drugs are being assessed and they are being valued as well. So this is a complete reframing of the approach that is required. What we have doesn't meet this need at the moment. And actually, it will be rely on a few elements. One is a coherence, and I'm not going to talk about that anymore. This is also very true about the collaboration. And we just concluded about collaboration between public and private. And for me, it is also another pathway that has to be reinvented, at least in France, so that these people can cross different pathways and different experiences along the way in this for the development of these new treatments.
Yeah, a fluid pathway. Antoine, a few words of conclusion.
Yes, well, biotherapies are clearly one of the most enthusiastic innovations that are happening right now in healthcare. So there are many challenges in manufacturing, and I truly believe that you in the audience are the people who will be able to face these challenges, solve these challenges, and will help us improve the health of our citizens. So anyway, everything we can do to help, we'll be here.
Thank you, Antoine. Serge?
I think we are living exciting times because we are now collecting the fruits of 30 years of research and development. But there are still big issues in front of us. We didn't touch upon the cost of those drugs, but it's sometimes linked to the production because, for example, the Zolgensma, which is presented as the most expensive drug in the world, this gene therapy for spinal muscular atrophy, the cost is 2 million the dose. And so the business model cannot sustain a multiplication of such drugs, of course. And my rough estimate is the cost of goods of Zolgensma just for the production is probably something like 50% of the cost of these drugs, so of the price. So it's really very, very expensive to produce, and so, but it's also exciting times in terms of opportunities because innovations are needed. Innovation eventually will come and solve the problem, and France has a very strong background in terms of biology in the field of gene therapy as well. And so we have probably very exciting years in front of us in production.
Thank you very much, Serge, and thank you very much to our panel. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Frédéric.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Antoine.